Hi, Heather.
Hi.
How was Folk Fest?
It was very fun. It was such a good
Good.
time. It was so nice to see all my kids and my sister and hang out with some of my friends. And yeah, I
Good.
haven't written a post about it yet, but I was thinking about writing a post about the life lessons you get from being at a folk festival in the woods, in the forest, because there was so much about it. It just creates this alternative community where people are
Yeah,
nice to each other and you're just in this collective experience that feels really generative. And
totally.
so yeah, that's
Speaking of collective generative experiences, that's actually a really nice segue to what I wanted to pick your brain about today. Ha ha ha. Because our next Leadership for Liminal Spaces webinar is coming up, and we're talking about nervous system activation and regulation and all that good stuff. And we were talking earlier before we hit record about playing with the word regulation and trying to see if maybe there was some better language we could use, because regulation can sound really legalistic maybe, or rigid, or there's some perfectionist elements to it. We
Hmm.
talked a little bit about, because nervous system activation isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, we're not opting for numbing people here. And we were talking about co-regulation and eco-regulation and all of these things. And so we sort of landed on, how do we ensure that our nervous system activation is regenerative or generative rather than destructive or numbing, or
Yeah.
potentially harmful to ourselves or others. So riff to me a little bit about what this idea of generative nervous system existence
Yeah.
means to you.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have a lot of ideas buzzing, and we just talked for an hour about this already about our upcoming webinar because we one of the limitations of language like regulation and the way that maybe I should not even the language so much as the way it's being used
Yeah.
in the commons,
Zeitgeist. Yeah.
the zeitgeist, is that it's like self-help. It's become kind of an individualistic project, regulating of your nervous system and not seeing the nervous system's interconnectedness with the collective, that we are all impacting each other's nervous systems and being benefiting from each other. We're interdependent, just like trees in the forest. And I always go back to those kinds of analogies of like, how do we see ourselves in the ecosystem? And so a lot of what is being taught out there about nervous system regulation is about how do I and develop practices that regulate my nervous system. And there's nothing bad about that, because
Mhm.
but it becomes a singular focus that misses the point of a lot of what we talk about in terms of how do I see myself as part of the collective? How do I see my nervous system activation and my nervous system soothing as both serving the collective? Because the fact of the matter is, if I have a dysregulated nervous system, it may be something that the collective needs to
Mm,
tap into. If I get activated by something that's going on in the systems we're part of, it may be something that I need to, like a tree, like we know now about the mycelium under this forest floor, that a tree that is experiencing some distress in one part of the forest is going to send those messages to the rest of the tree to say, it's time to protect yourself against this particular virus or bug or something because it's causing me distress out here on the edge of the forest. And so the
mhm,
rest of the trees in the forest will equip themselves to protect themselves and each other against that, whatever that means. And similarly, if I get an activated nervous system, it may be information that you need and the collective needs to make changes, to adapt, to prepare ourselves, to build resilience. And so if we're just looking at regulation, then it's becomes more of a numbing. I'm just going to numb myself so that I don't have to feel so much and I don't have to be
yeah.
tapped into the pain of the world. But the pain of the world is giving us really important information. And so and having just been at the folk festival, for example, there's all multiple stages where you can listen to different kinds of music. And I'm very often drawn, as you can imagine, to the protest songs. And protest songs come from a place of activation. Like, and
Yeah.
we need protest songs. Like, I'm a big believer in music for the resistance. And it comes out of that place of activation and pain. You don't write a protest
Yep.
song if you're not feeling some of that collective pain. And it gives a message to the collective. So I don't want that musician to just soothe their nervous system so they're writing, different kinds of songs. I want them to have a healthy relationship with their nervous system and a
Yes.
healthy collective that is caring for their nervous system when they're activated. All that is important. But let's not just look at deactivating the nervous system. Let's look at the collective value of the nervous system and how we're tied together and how the threads of your nervous system are, like the mycelium under the forest floor, passing information and supporting everybody else that's in the collective. So those are some of the big picture things that you and I are talking about as we prepare to for this next webinar. And some of those are still sort of thoughts that we're picking out of the
Yeah,
atmosphere as we
totally.
prepare. But it feels really important to maybe disrupt some of the language we have around nervous systems or some of what's become common language and interrogate it to see what's underneath it and how it can sometimes contribute to empire, to capitalism, to the systems that are oppressive if we just soothe ourselves and don't look at what's important, what the value of the activation.
Totally. Well, and I'm just thinking too, as you're speaking, like, um, how if we are only ever focused inwardly and either soothing our own nervous system or getting lost in our own nervous system, um, how it can distract you from everything else. And I know, like, even on the calls that we have with our courses, the co-regulation that happens isn't so much of a, okay, everybody be calm now. It's a, no, I see you and what you're feeling is valid and you're not losing your mind. These things are going on, they are happening. So that in that witnessing, all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, right. I don't feel as out of control anymore. And now I can contribute in a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
So some of that, again, it's not about numbing out or ignoring what's going on. Some of it is just the witnessing and the seeing and realizing that you're not in this alone
Hmm.
necessarily. There are other people that see the same things that you see, that are
Yeah.
experiencing the same things that you see or experiencing. And I know, we've talked a lot about people who are deep into whatever kinds of information or disinformation, that a lot of times what's happening is they're getting the feeling right but the facts wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like the feeling that things are not right, that feeling that, the economy is struggling, the feeling that I am living paycheck to paycheck, like all of those feelings are right. The causes of them, I think, are many and varied and more nuanced than some folks maybe want to believe, but that those feelings are real and valid.
Hmm.
And then when you get into spaces that acknowledge those feelings, again, then you start tapping into that safety of belonging stuff. But a lot of it is simply searching for that co-regulation and that witnessing and being interconnected without being conscious necessarily that that's what's happening.
Yeah. And the collective holding of that. And that's
Yeah.
why I say, like, how do we re-envision our nervous systems as being intertwined
Yes.
so that it, like, when you hold space for me, and we talk about being a shock absorber, which is kind of the
Yeah.
negative version of, like, I'm receiving your shock and I'm allowing it to land in my body and live in my body,
Yeah.
which often happens when people aren't fully conscious of the
Yes.
work they're doing holding space. So we need to know how to dissipate it, that kind of
Yeah.
energetic, and hold it collectively so that it doesn't do damage to us if we're holding space for the
That's right.
person who is activated. But at the same time, you being able to, like, release that into the collective for the collective holding is like a trusting the collective to a um emerge some wisdom out of it, that like the
Yeah,
protest song, like somebody
totally.
comes with their pain to the collective and says, I am being like harmed by the system. Okay, so what do we as a collective need to do? And then another person, the artist, rises up and says, I have a piece to offer. I have some art to offer that comes out of that activation,
Yeah.
that collective holding of it in a way that creates alternatives, but doesn't get trapped in the just the activation all of a sudden, because
Yes.
there are different ways of holding it. We can hold it as
Yes.
you come to the room with a lot of anxiety and suddenly the whole room is anxious. Or we
Mm-hmm.
hold it in, you come to the room with anxiety. We dissipate some of that anxiety by holding it for and with you. And then we alchemize it by turning it into something.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily have to be you doing that, but you bring that pain. And now the artists rise up, the wisdom teachers rise up, the
Mhm.
activists rise up and are responding to something that showed up in your nervous system. And
Absolutely.
that's where community is so important, and collective wisdom is so important, and the interconnectedness of the ecosystem that we're part of.
And the center, I think that speaks so much to the importance of the center, right? Like that
Yeah,
the pain is not going to a specific person, it is going to the center, that collective
exactly.
center.
Yeah,
And that's where it can be, you can have the pause and witness it, and then, yeah, like you say, alchemize it into something that
yeah,
is hopefully generative and
yeah,
not harmful.
yeah,
um and yeah, I was just, I was about to say not destructive, but then I was thinking, no, sometimes it does need to be destructive. Sometimes we do need to destroy a thing to take it apart. That's part of the
yeah,
regenerative,
yeah,
systems that we're talking about, that things do need to die and be
yeah,
torn down or even burn at some points,
yeah, yeah.
in order for new things to grow. So yeah, we're exploring a lot of this languaging. And we'll have something really cool and cohesive by the time the 31st rolls around, because we're
We
just
will.
amazing like that.
Yeah. Or not, and you can bring your own
Or
ideas,
not.
and that's one of the beauties
Yeah.
of this emerging work that we're creating with our leadership for liminal spaces. Is a lot of this is stuff we've been thinking about for years and
Yeah.
years, and you and I have had like countless
So many
hundreds of
conversations. Yeah.
conversations about it as it evolves. So a lot of it is really well baked in some ways, and it's still an emerging wisdom, and so it's emerging in a way that you can feed into and tap into, as we say, the collective, like that you
Yeah.
can show up at our webinar and there's a generativeness to it, in being in that space together with others who
Totally.
are thinking about these things. And so if you're curious about nervous systems, but you are wondering whether the current language is sufficient for what we're facing, this is a really good place for you to come and tap into that.
Totally. And I think, we've called this leadership for liminal spaces, and we're looking for people who are willing to help lead some of this stuff, because these containers and these conversations require people willing to step up and hold them and host them and help
Yeah.
create those spaces where, again, the alchemy can happen in really unique ways.
Yeah, and I wanted, this just came up for me as we're talking, that we're using this language of being a grounded guide.
Yeah.
And a grounded guide, and I think about in terms of, like, let's say somebody who is the what's it you put on your house when there's a lightning storm to ground the
Oh, the
house, like
lightning
it's a
rod.
lightning
Yeah,
rod.
lightning rod. Yeah.
Like the grounded guide may be that person also who has the deeply rooted groundedness, that when the lightning rod comes, which activates the nervous system, they can ground that into the
Ground it.
earth instead of burning down the house. Or like you say, sometimes the house needs to be burned down, but
Hmm.
there is that grounding in terms of, okay, this is coming at us, and
Yeah.
how do we ground ourselves to equip ourselves to prepare for the storm that's coming. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that you know nuanced language around being the
Totally.
grounded guide isn't that we're always going to be the calm and soothed one. Sometimes the electricity is going to hit, but we know how to send it into the ground,
Yeah.
and then address whatever damage it might have done.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's some really good languaging already around some of this stuff. We talk about the window of tolerance, and Heather will give a little more explanation of that on the 31st.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're obviously getting really excited about this because we've been yammering on about it. But we'd love to see you on the 31st of July this month for session 6. We're like more than halfway through the
Yeah.
Leadership for Liminal Spaces program, which is exciting. It's $50 to join the hour-and-a-half webinar. We usually go a little longer because we always have so much content. And then there's a study group after if you really want to get into it with us and start picking apart some of these concepts with other folks who
Yeah.
are also interested. You're welcome to join that as well. Find it all on our website, centerforholdingspace.com/leadership for liminal spaces. And our registration is open for our next cohort for the Holding Space, How to Hold Space Foundation program. It's a mouthful. It's a brainful, but it is such a lovely course. We had such a lovely cohort this last year.
Yeah.
Some really, really good conversations, amazing people coming through. If you are looking to, how should we pitch it this time, Heather?
Well, I'm thinking, I mean, just what we've talked about. Like if you're looking to become more skilled at the collective
Yeah.
holding that is required when people's nervous systems get activated, this is like one of the only programs I know of that's really going deep in that kind of work of like how do we show up? How do we do our own self-tending
Yes.
so
Yeah.
that we can hold space for
Yeah.
what's showing up among our people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's also on our website. Heather has done a lot of work cleaning up our website, making it look really, really cool. So go check it out, browse around, come learn with us. We have lots of free stuff on there as well. And we're here on Substack pretty regular. Heather just wrote a lovely, lovely post about the late Andrea Gibson and Joanna Macy, who's not late yet, but who's
Is
completing
journeying
her
in that
journey
direction.
completing her journey on this
Yeah.
particular plane. So do go check that out. And yeah, feel welcome to interact with us in all of those wonderful ways.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think we're covered it.
All righty. Well, we will see you potentially next week. And if not, we will see you on the 31st for webinar 6 of Leadership for Liminal Spaces. We'll see you then.
All right. Take care.